Incidents of racial tension continue to afflict the state of Alabama. We all saw what happened with the Montgomery brawl. We saw the father in Birmingham, a Hispanic going to work, who was killed, robbed right in front of his home, targeted for being a Hispanic. Recently in Montgomery, Alabama, an onslaught of crimes is taking place, targeting specifically all of the city's Hispanic-owned businesses are being robbed, targeted, and even we're seeing murders in these robberies. Alabama's Hispanic community is under attack by African American gangs, knowing that law enforcement is not going to persecute anything if the person pressing charges is a minority, and that's exactly what they're doing. Let's get into today's story.
3 people died in a shooting at a Hispanic-owned grocery store in Montgomery. Montgomery's Hispanic community is on edge, afraid they're being targeted.
It's clear Spanish-speaking citizens have been targeted.
Those who have been targeting our Latino Hispanic businesses all across this community.
Own ice cream shop on Bell Road. There was also a robbery and shooting at a Mexican restaurant off Taylor Road. Those are just a couple of crimes targeting the Latino community.
Montgomery, Alabama, a violent crime spree targeting Latinos has already left 3 people dead and countless others victimized. If you had any doubts about the situation about being Latino in Alabama, these news articles are clear evidence that the Latino community is once again under attack by the cowardly African American gangs of Alabama who go after the weakest individuals, those who they perceive that law enforcement will not protect. And clearly the issue isn't even the gangs and criminals. The problem is that law enforcement in Montgomery, Alabama continues to not protect Hispanics, making them easy targets for criminals. From personal experience, when I lived in the Montgomery metropolitan area, I was being robbed by African Americans. When I spoke to the Millbrook Police Department, they told me that the resources of Alabama were to protect U.S. citizens and that I was an illegal Mexican. In fact, law enforcement told me that now I was an even bigger target because I talked to law enforcement and they did nothing, confirming to the criminals that if they wanted to come back and hurt me, they were good to go. The real story here isn't that Hispanics are being targeted by African American gangs. The real story here is that the police in Alabama continues to ignore the cries for help of the Hispanic community to the point where criminals know if they target them, they're what's known as a free hit. Now, I've been reporting on this situation for years now. Recently, it's getting news attention because once again, 3 people have lost their lives in Montgomery unnecessarily in a robbery targeting people who most likely are going to get absolutely zero help from law enforcement. The mayor of Montgomery assures everyone that they're going to be involving federal resources to help investigate this case, since evidence suggests that the reason criminals are targeting these communities is because of the lack of effort from law enforcement. Even law enforcement is saying, hey, we're not even the ones that are going to investigate this because, well, we're the reason it's happening. Interestingly, it almost confirms the fact that law enforcement in Montgomery doesn't want to protect these communities by the fact they're having other agencies come in and do it for them. When I faced the Millbrook Police Department, I actually reached out to federal resources, letting them know that the Millbrook Police Department, a suburb of Montgomery, was refusing to take my robbery case even though I had evidence because they were claiming I was an illegal despite the fact I'm a U.S. citizen, my house was paid off. The federal government told me that they're partners with the Millbrook Police Department and they don't believe my allegations that the police department was refusing to take my case. And to this point, I still have not been able to press charges on the people who robbed me in Millbrook, despite the fact I have evidence. Point being, in the state of Alabama, Hispanics, whether legal or illegal, do not receive any protection from law enforcement. Again, this is not about legality. The Millbrook Police Department and as well as the Montgomery Police Department claim that it has to do with people who are illegal, who are afraid to talk to law enforcement. I'm not illegal. I'm a U.S. citizen. I talk to law enforcement. I even talk to federal agencies, and nothing happened because in Alabama, Hispanics, Latinos, and minorities are completely unprotected by any type of law enforcement. The Latino community in Montgomery and Birmingham are still relatively small. These two cities are among the deadliest cities in the United States. The homicide rate in Birmingham, Alabama is 4 times higher than Chicago, Illinois, and 8 times higher than Los Angeles. And with Hispanics and minorities being predominantly targeted by criminals, the chances of being victimized if you're a minority living in Birmingham or Montgomery doesn't mean that at some point you're going to be a victim. The reality is you're going to be victimized repeatedly over and over to the point that eventually the probabilities of you actually being killed in a homicide are significant. This is the reason why I moved out of Montgomery, Alabama. Despite the fact economically things were going great for me, the dangers had become so persistent that it wasn't worth staying there. And that was me as a U.S. citizen with an American-born wife and with legal weapons that I had licenses for. While living in Montgomery, on 4 different occasions in one single year, I had to face somebody off at the barrel of a gun because they were trying to rob me, thinking that because I was a minority that I wouldn't be armed, I wouldn't be a U.S. citizen, I wouldn't defend myself, and they just assumed they could just rob me because they felt like it and that nothing would happen. But when you think about the state of Alabama, a state that is now the 3rd highest homicide rate in the entire country. Only the neighbors of Louisiana and Mississippi have a higher homicide rate. In Montgomery, Alabama, the state's capital, the cemeteries are well groomed and Confederate flags are changed regularly outside the tombs of Confederate memorials, while the schools have plywood on the windows. The cemeteries of the dead from yesterday are perfectly manicured, while the schools of today do not have central heating and air conditioning. This is the mindset of Alabama. They care more about their Confederate memorials and their hate of the past than they do about the future of their own children. In a state where even the people that are from there have zero self-respect, they value their own lives as nothing, considering the state's homicide rate and credibility. When it comes to safety, Alabama has absolutely zero interest in protecting their people. Their laws purposely put their own citizens in danger. With high homicide rates and other leading causes of death, Alabama is now the 3rd deadliest state to live in the United States by homicide rate alone. A state that does not care about its own citizens, how could they care about migrants? Imagine living in a state as an outsider that doesn't even care about their schools, but they care about preserving their cemeteries. They keep their cemeteries well manicured and beautiful, while the schools don't even have central heating or air conditioning. A state that doesn't even care about its own people, how do you think they're going to treat a group of people from somewhere else? I recently made a video in Spanish warning people that are Hispanic about the dangers of living in Alabama. The video reached over 300,000 people. A lot of the people were Hispanics that live in Alabama, saying that there's absolutely no threat to their safety. Many of these individuals are simply not aware of the dangers they are facing, or they refuse to accept the reality that they are living in a place where their lives have absolutely zero value. What are the chances that the law enforcement agency who put you in the predicament you're in to begin with because they refuse to protect you is going to give you a fair shot in court when you actually defend your business? These individuals in Alabama's government use vocabularies like the resources of Alabama are at your disposal. When I lived in Millbrook, Alabama, they told me that I was an illegal immigrant and that the resources of Alabama were only for U.S. citizens. When I showed them my driver's license, my concealed carry permit, and my U.S. citizenship paperwork, and the fact that I own my house outright, you know what they told me? You're still Mexican. Even though they clearly knew that I was Cuban. They labeled me a Mexican as an offensive way to try to offend me for being Hispanic. And that's the other aspect of Alabama, is that no matter how legal your situation is, they're never going to acknowledge you. They're never going to respect your rights as a U.S. citizen. They don't want you there. They hate you. And if you have a concealed carry permit in Alabama and you do defend yourself as a minority, what makes you think that law enforcement is actually going to protect you when they are the reason why you are being targeted? The real story here, again, isn't that criminals are targeting minorities is that law enforcement has given criminals the green card, the go-ahead to do it, because they know that nothing's going to happen. The way that they described it to me in Alabama was, if a black person kills a Hispanic, the N goes to prison and the H or the M goes to the grave. We killed two birds with one stone. That's exactly what law enforcement told me in Alabama. If a black person wants to kill you, great. The black person, and they don't say the word black person in Alabama, they have another word they use. The black person goes to prison and the Mexican goes to the grave. We're killing two birds with one stone. That's the mentality that they have in Alabama. There isn't a resolution for Hispanics living in this dangerous state. If they choose to live here, their lives are constantly in danger. Over the last few years, the overdose death rate in Alabama has increased dramatically. Alabama's overdose death rate is now higher than California's. The Mexican community and the Hispanic communities of Alabama are not going to exactly defend themselves, because legally they're not going to be able to defend their cause. But what's going to happen in Alabama is that the overdose death rate is going to spike significantly. That's how they're going to retaliate for what's happening. So at the end of the day, don't think that you're going to go and hurt these people and rob them. Don't think you're going to hurt those people and that somehow it's not going to come back to bite you. Because in life, when you grab somebody and you push them and you push them and you hurt them and you hurt them, eventually those people are going to fight back. They're eventually going to get sick and tired of it. You would think that with all the pain and suffering and affliction that the African American community in Alabama suffered at the hands of the oppressing whites, that they would be considerate and accommodating to the needs of minorities and other people who are being oppressed because they were one day in that position, but they're not. They're no different than the whites who enslaved them. African Americans in Alabama today are dishing out the same exact hate that whites inflicted on them upon other people, like if they weren't in that position themselves. You would think with all that black people in Alabama have suffered at the hands of the white oppressors, that they themselves wouldn't become oppressors, but they are. And what's about to happen in Alabama is most likely that the Hispanic community really is sick and tired of being pushed around, and they're probably going to retaliate. The black people of Alabama, do you realize how tough the whites in Alabama made you? That's exactly what you're doing to the Hispanics in Alabama. You're making them as tough as the whites made you. Unfortunately, this is just not worth the hassle. I left Alabama and they can keep that crap hole of a state. I live in Florida near the beaches. It isn't worth living around these types of savages. The city of Montgomery used to have a sizable Latino community, and they got so bad that most of them left. Now you have Guatemalans and other minorities that are trying to once again come into the city of Montgomery. Now the new communities are Venezuelans, Haitians. They're coming from war-torn countries, and these groups are definitely not going to give way to anybody trying to harass them. They're already fleeing a country that's at war. So what makes you think that when they come here, they're actually going to let somebody throw them around? The police isn't going to change their stance on protecting migrants. The police and their hate for minorities is the reason why this is happening. They're not going to stop being hateful overnight. What makes you think that a place that's had hate for centuries is going to all of a sudden now start to protect? How is Alabama going to protect these people now? How can this police agency now say, oh, we're going to protect these people? Really? Oh, you had to change a heart now? No. What's really happening is they're getting the heat. They're starting to see that the spotlight really isn't on the criminals. The spotlight is on the law enforcement agencies. With the federal government investigating these cases and pressing charges, once these individuals who are victimizing the Latino community are sent to a prison, it may not be an Alabama state prison. If it's a federal prison, they're most likely going to have to face the community that they were harassing. I wouldn't want to be the individual going to a federal prison for committing crimes against a minority group when that minority group is powerful in the federal prison system. And really what's going to have to happen in Alabama is what happens with Mexico. In Mexico, when they capture a cartel leader, they know that the justice is corrupt within the state level, so they extradite that person into the United States. That's really what's going to have to start happening in Alabama. When they capture somebody for committing a racial crime, instead of them going to the Alabama state prison system where they can be rewarded, nah, buddy, you're not going to go to prison in Alabama. You're going to go to a federal prison where the people that you were victimizing are going to be able to get their hands on you. And really, that is why Mexican cartels are so afraid of extradition to the United States, because they'll end up in federal hands. And that's really what the state of Alabama is going to have to do when they capture these people that are committing race-related violent crimes. They can't go to the state prison level. They have to take it to the federal level. And perhaps that will deter these individuals from committing these crimes when they know that when they get caught, they're not going to be dealing with Alabama. They're going to be dealing with the feds. You're not going to be as safe in a federal prison if you're going in there for targeting Mexicans. I can guarantee you that. But perhaps the situation in Alabama is getting so bad that really when these types of crimes happen, it shouldn't be the state that takes care of it. It should be the federal government. And perhaps that will be somewhat of a deterrent for individuals who become emboldened to take on these acts, thinking that they're going to go to an Alabama state prison, where perhaps they might even be rewarded for these types of activities. Taking it to the federal level might make these people think twice about their behavior. And sadly, this just goes to show how degraded the state of Alabama has become, when now even its prison system is no longer a deterrent for these types of activities. Inmates in the Alabama state prison system are having complete social media lives, posting daily about their activities, sometimes even live streaming video from within the Alabama prison system, showing how they're able to access cell phones, weapons freely, and able to upload it to the internet without repercussion from law enforcement, because this is how corrupt the Alabama corrections system has become, where even the inmates that are in there are able to live somewhat completely normal online lives from behind prison bars. We've even seen the case in Alabama that it's so corrupt that inmates are able to leave the prison and commit crimes on the outside. Many times the people that commit these atrocious crimes in Alabama are people that are already within the prison system. Thus, how can you find a person on the outside who committed a crime when the person is technically behind prison bars? This is how bad things have gotten in Alabama, where many of the crimes that are happening on the streets are actually inmates that are in prison and are somehow able to get out, commit crimes, and then come back into the prison system. When it comes to law, order, security, the state of Alabama is in a deplorable condition. The corruption and ineffectiveness of the state of Alabama, they're able to leave the prison if they feel like it, have access to the internet, weapons, and even women within the prisons. This is how bad Alabama corrections has become, and it's nothing more than a small taste of what the entire state of Alabama is actually like today. Out of control violence, homicide, gang activity, ineffective correction systems leaves the state of Alabama in a complete state of insecurity. And while the minority groups are the most vulnerable, living in Alabama for anybody is dangerous. In general, the nature of crime in Alabama is very cowardly. Alabama is the most dangerous state for children. There's a cowardly nature to criminals where they target children because they're vulnerable. They target minority groups because they're vulnerable. Alabama is the most dangerous state for children, and it's the most dangerous state for minorities. That should just give you an idea of the mindset of the average Alabama criminal. They like to prey on the weak. Yeah, here the blacks and whites, the two biggest groups in Alabama, have been at each other's throats for hundreds of years, and they're afraid to throw a share at each other. Here in South Florida, African Americans are the absolute minority. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of Hispanic gangs in Florida starting to go after African American businesses and African Americans because the cops are less likely to protect them. It's just a very cowardly thing to do. It's not in our nature to act cowardly like that. Gangs here in South Florida go and rob $400,000 boats and strip the engines off them. And these are, the rich people. They go after the big licks. But in Alabama, these dudes are still doing like robberies at grocery stores. That's like the dumbest thing you could do to begin with. I mean, let's face it, armed robberies are the dumbest form of criminal activity you can engage in. You're going to risk going to prison for 15, 20 years over a few $100s. I mean, you can go steal a boat, get $40,000 worth of equipment off of it, and if you get caught, you might do a year or two of probation. I know people in Florida who have committed hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card frauds, and they get off with maybe a year in prison, a few years of probation. Crap, I've seen people commit these types of crimes and get off the hook because of some technicality with law enforcement. You literally have to be a moron to commit a crime that can give you 20 years in prison, and now you've killed 3 people in the process, so you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life for a crime that might have netted you a few $1,000s. There's a drug dealer in Fort Myers right now who was caught with $1 million in cash, and I think she's facing like probation or something, and they're trying to get her off on a technicality. The lawyer literally passed up on 1 year of probation because of some technicalities with evidence. So like, there's crimes you can go out there and make a crap load of money and not get that much of a time spree. Dude, you have to be completely retarded to go out there and do a strong arm robbery knowing you're going to be facing literally the rest of your life in prison for a few $1,000s. So it's not like you're dealing with very bright individuals to begin with. If you're thinking about moving to the state of Alabama, regardless of your race or nationality, I hope you're listening to today's video, because these people are complete savages. The only thing they know is violence. Like, you could literally give these people a better option and they would still choose violence because that's all they know. They're complete savages. That's the situation in Alabama. Absolutely detestable situation.